Hello, welcome to Guide London. My name's Nick Sam and I'm a Blue Badge London tourist guide, one of 600 members of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides that run the Guide London website. Now, if you've been joining us over the last 3 months, you would have seen a number of broadcasts on some of the wonderful places we can show you in London. If you're wondering what a Blue Badge tourist guide is, then the Blue Badge is a professional qualification awarded by the Institute of Tourist Guiding here in the United Kingdom. And in order to get your Blue Badge, you need to study for 2 years and pass a large number of exams. So it's really a qualification. And you know that when you book a tour with a Blue Badge guide, you're getting the best quality tour that you could possibly get. So we can't guide at the moment because London is still in lockdown. So what we've been doing is these regular broadcasts on a Monday, a Wednesday and Friday to try and bring a little bit of London to you. Now, London is gradually opening up. Hopefully, we will see some tourists back soon. So we are going to reduce the number of broadcasts each week from next week. From next week, we'll just be broadcasting on a Wednesday at this time, 4 p.m. And we'll try and get out into the fresh air and show you a little bit of what London can offer to you. Today's a rather gloomy day in London, so what better day to get out of the city and out into some of the glorious English countryside. And today we're going to visit an area that's about 60 miles west of London, known for its outstanding beauty, and that is the area known as the Cotswolds. To talk to us all about the Cotswolds, I'm joined today by Mitchell Cregor. He often takes people to the Cotswolds, shows them some of the beautiful villages we have there and the wonderful sights. And he's going to tell us a bit about the area today, a bit about its history, and a bit about the things that you can see if you come on a visit with a guide to the Cotswolds. We are broadcasting live, so we'd love to hear where you're watching us from in the world. We'd love to answer your questions as well. If you've got any questions about the Cotswolds or any aspect of visiting London, then do ask us and we'll try and answer them if we possibly can. So for the time being, I'm going to hand over to Mitchell, who's going to tell us all about the Cotswolds. Mitchell.
Thank you, Nick. That was a very nice introduction and good afternoon. Well, it's good afternoon from the UK. I hope you're having a good day wherever you are and whatever time it is. It's my great pleasure to talk to you about a part of England which I very much like. My name, as Nick has said, and it says on the screen, is Mitchell, and I qualified as a Blue Badge guide in 2011. And pretty much from the start, I specialised in what we call driver guiding. That essentially means that I own my own vehicle, which is fully licensed and insured. I can take 6 in my current executive van and do private tours either within or outside London. And the Cotswolds is certainly a very popular destination for a day trip, but you can also spend a few nights there as well. And I'll talk a bit about that shortly. So we're going to start with the question is, where are the Cotswolds and what are they? Now, you can see in the map on the left, and Nick mentioned this, it's an area of outstanding natural beauty, and that's an official designation. It was given in 1966, and in effect, that means it's like a national park. The land is managed so that it can be enjoyed by people now, but they also want to conserve and enhance it for others to enjoy in the future. And it covers about 6 different counties of England. Now, it's bordered by some of the most famous tourist cities in this country. On the bottom there, you can see in the south is the city of Bath, the great Georgian city of Bath, which I think has been the subject of another of these types of talks. And if you look up to the north, it's Stratford upon Avon. And then on the east side there is the city of Oxford, the University City of Oxford. The whole of the green bit covers about 790 square miles and has a population of around about 140,000 people who live in that national park area. Now, we've put Oxford, or I've put Oxford on there, because if you look on the right to that map, you can see London's marked down there in the black. And it takes about 1.5 hours to get from London to the Cotswolds, which start about 8 miles outside of Oxford. So it's very doable as a day trip from London. Now, Why do people go to the Cotswolds? Well, really, it's called quintessential English countryside. It is absolutely beautiful. It's got towns and villages which are joined up by this extraordinary countryside, beautiful clear streams and wooded valleys. You get people who love to hike going there. There's lots of trails. You get people going there because they want to ride. There's lots of equestrian events in the Cotswolds. But I would say that for the most part, it's like a nice place to go for a day out, which largely involves food and drink. So typically you go there, see a bit of a village, have perhaps a nice pub lunch. There are some great pubs in the Cotswolds. Walk around a bit more, walk off your lunch, have an ice cream, and then you've got a good excuse to have some tea, and that leaves you with a really nice day out. And on a good day, a lot of people have that idea and go there for that reason. If we can move to the next slide, please, Nick. Now, I'm going to be honest and say I don't think too many people go to the Cotswolds to stare at sheep. You almost certainly will see some sheep if you go outside of the towns a little way. But to understand what you're seeing when you're there, you have to know a little bit about sheep, because sheep are absolutely integral to the development of the Cotswolds area. I'm going to start with a major period in our history when sheep farming definitely grew, and that was the Roman times. They came here in AD 43. They got to this region probably about AD 47, and we know that around a town called Cirencester, they had fairly large estates where they kept sheep, and that they continued until they left here in AD 410. We then move into the what's called Anglo-Saxon period, and in that period we had a very important development, which was two words which were used in relation to sheep. One was a cotts, that meant an enclosure for sheep, and the other one was wold, which was an enclosure on a hill. A wold was a hill, some say a wooded hill, and certainly at that time England would have been more wooded than it is now. So essentially the word Cotswold is sheep enclosure on a hill, and it dates back till then. The development of this business continued at a pace, and then in 1066 we were invaded by the Normans, and at that point the church, which became increasingly powerful, got involved in the wool business, because that really was the business to be in. So for a period you had in parallel incredible wealth being generated both by the church on the one hand, particularly through monasteries, and on the other independent private wool merchants, and they were making some very good money. By then there was a breed which had developed, which had a particularly sort of shaggy coat, as it were, a white face and no horns, and the picture on the left shows them. They're called Cotswolds lions, and the fleece that they have called the golden fleece, not because it was a golden color, but because it generated a lot of money. Now in 1536 King Henry VIII decided to eject the papacy from our church, and he established the Church of England, and from then the monastic involvement declined, but the private merchants continued to prosper, and that went on really until the onset of the Industrial Revolution in around 1750, and from then it began to decline in the Cotswolds because sheep production was moved further north in the country, where they had more efficient ways of generating power for the textile mills, and so it became a very big industry up there, and the Cotswolds was faced with really a prolonged period of poverty. Now the misfortune of the people living there was our great fortune, because effectively a lot of the towns and villages were mothballed, and some of them virtually abandoned, but they actually were very beautiful, as they still are. And so when the industrialists made money and began to sort of move back into those areas, they began to revive, but they weren't on the whole overdeveloped. So it was a blessing for us, even though it was difficult times for them. By the First World War, these Cotswold lions had become a rare breed. Fortunately, there's been a program to reinstate them, and there's now quite a few of them, but there are several breeds, and sheep farming still does happen in the Cotswolds. but it's not what it used to be, nowhere near. It's very small industry now, and as much to do, in fact, much more to do with meat than it is to do with wool. We can have the next slide. Thank you, Nick. Now, what's this? Well, this is a recognition of the incredible contribution that sheep made to the economy of this country. It's thought that during the Middle Ages, up to about 80% of our industry was in fact sheep farming, and this is called the wool sack, and upon it sits the Lord Speaker of the House of Lords. So it's to be found in our upper chamber of government. That's been going on since the 14th century, and in 1938 it was restuffed, not only with British wool but also wool from other Commonwealth countries that produce wool, like New Zealand, for example. If I can have the next slide. Now, one of the byproducts of the incredible wealth that the merchants accrued was that they would give money, endow money to churches. In some ways, there was almost a competition between them to see who could develop the most beautiful church. And the wool churches, as they're called, are to be found throughout the Cotswolds. You can literally spend a week going from village to village. Each one has a different church, and they're all unique and beautiful. But the reason I've picked out these two is because actually major historic events took place in them. Between 1642 and 1649, we had a civil war. On one side was King Charles I leading the royalists, and on the other side were the parliamentarians under a man called Oliver Cromwell. Now, it wasn't a single battle, it was actually an elongated series of skirmishes that went on for several years until the king, in fact, was executed in 1649 in London. The church on the left is to be found, it's the St. John the Baptist Church, to be found in the village of Burford. And Burford is without doubt one of the most beautiful and unspoiled of the Cotswolds villages. Now, in this church in 1649, in fact, in May of that year, there was an event which was very important for the left in this country. The left see the Levellers, as they were called, as early proponents of the things that they stand for. So what had happened was that early in the Civil War, this group called the Levellers were allies of the parliamentary forces, but later in the war they became disillusioned, and especially after the king had been executed, they felt that Oliver Cromwell was behaving like a dictator and they weren't being paid. So there was a rebellion, and Cromwell saw the opportunity to quash it. 340 of them were rounded up and they were imprisoned in this church for a few days. And in fact, if you go in there and you look at the font, you will see one of the prisoners attested to that fact by inscribing it on the font. There's also a plaque. Now, in 1975, the three who were taken out and shot in front of the other prisoners were remembered in a special service, and that's been going on every May ever since, and it's called Levellers Day. The church on the right is to be found in another lovely village called Saffron Walden. It's actually the highest village in the crossroad in the Cotswolds, and the crossroads for 8 different major intersections. And so, not surprisingly, got bound up in this civil war. There was a battle that started outside the village. It ended up spilling into the village square, which is still very much there. And again, they decided that the only place where they could hold the captured royalist prisoners on this occasion was in this church, where they were imprisoned for only one night, and then they were marched off elsewhere to be dealt with. But this church has another claim to fame, as we're going to see in the next slide. And it's this famous door. This door is a former entrance. You can see it's got on either side yew trees, which are quite commonly found in churchyards because it helped to deter through the poison the animals from going in there. But this church door, it is said by some, was the inspiration for Tolkien to describe an entrance to a place called Moria in The Lord of the Rings. Now, this is very hotly disputed. It is true that Tolkien did some pictures which showed a door very similar to this, and those pictures were showing it in stone. But we do not know, and the argument rages on, but certainly you'll get lots of Lord of the Rings fans seeking out these particular doors in this church in Stow on the Wold. We can move on to the next picture. So we have the walled churches. The other thing that we have is manor houses. These were beautiful houses that the rich merchants built for themselves, made, as you can see, of this classic Cotswold limestone, because this oolitic limestone is a wonderful building material. I'm no builder, but I understand it's quite easy to cut and manipulate, and that is something that's very distinctive in the whole of the Cotswolds. Plenty of stone, not only in the main structure, but also the roofing as well. Now, some of these have become beautiful hotels. Some of them have got spas and saunas, etc., beautiful gardens and fantastic cuisine to be found there too. So if you get a chance to stay in a manor house hotel in the Cotswolds, as some of my clients like to do, I very much can recommend that. But this particular house is a place called Kelmscott Manor. It was purchased in 1871 by a man called William Morris with a pre-Raphaelite artist called Rossetti, who was the joint signatory. And he called this place Heaven on Earth. He bought it as his summer house. You can actually visit this place. It's now something of a museum. This year it's actually not open at all because they're doing some refurbishment. So from 2021, they were due to reopen and hopefully will reopen then. And you can go there to find out about this great man. So if we can move to the next slide, we can get a look at what William Morris looked like. There's a portrait of him on the left. Now, he was around, as I mentioned, in the second half of the 19th century, in the peak of the Industrial Revolution. He had gone to Oxford University, where he met a very famous artist called Edmund Burne-Jones, another of the leading pre-Raphaelites, and also an important thinker called John Ruskin, who was also associated with a movement that he's often seen the father of, and that's called the Arts and Crafts movement. After Oxford, William Morris went down to work for a firm of architects in London who were into neo-Gothical styling, and he increasingly felt that modern industrial processes were inferior to old-fashioned ways of doing things, and he wanted to reinstigate the old way of doing things. So if you look at the picture on the right, you can see a very famous wallpaper that he developed called Willow Boff. That is still on sale to this day, and the difference between that and most others was that this was actually hand printed. So it was expensive, but very special. The picture below shows some fabric. He was also a fabric designer as well as a writer, novelist, thinker and general genius. This was called Strawberry Thief. Again, it's still on sale, and you can see it. It was used for curtains and coverings for furniture. If you've got any doubts about the importance of William Morris in this country's history, go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and there's quite a large area devoted to this very special man. We can go on to the next picture. Now, one of the places that Morris liked to go was this one here, which is one of my favourite spots in the Cotswolds. It's actually a folly called Broadway Tower, and it was built originally in the late 18th century for the 6th Earl of Coventry, who owned 2 large estates in this area. He commissioned the most famous landscape gardener of the time, called Capability Brown, or Lancelot Capability Brown, to come up with this idea of a folly, and the builder who executed it said it was like a Saxon tower. It obviously is not Saxon, it's from the 18th century, but you can see if you look at it, it's got crenellations at the top there, those sort of up and down bits that look a bit like a castle. You've got the windows are looking like arrow slits, you've got the balconies, so it's actually an amalgam of different styles. And this was a place that Morris liked to go with his friends at the weekends, and particularly these great pre-Raphaelite artists. And indeed, it was from here that he started a movement to conserve buildings which he was already worried about losing in the 19th century. And so he did a lot to establish the preservation and listing of buildings in this country. If you look beyond the building itself, you can get an idea of the sort of view you can get from this very high escarpment. In fact, you can look, if you look, you see to the left of it a little sort of viewing post. On a clear day, you can see 16 English counties from this spot. And the other tip is that right, or just behind it, is a very nice tea shop. So it's a wonderful place to go by car. You can go up there by car, have a look at the view. You can go inside that tower. You can learn more about William Morris inside in an exhibition in the tower, or you can walk up there. If we go to the next slide, please, Nick. Now, one of the things that this area is famed for, because of the stone that's locally available and what you would see on a walk down into the village or town of Broadway from Broadway Tower and elsewhere, are these dry stone walls. Now, that literally means they did not use mortar when they made these walls. They would stack the stones so that they were pointing slightly downwards, and then insert smaller stones between them to build them up. So that was in the horizontal, and then at the top they put them in the vertical. Now, these were especially developed in the 18th century, when Parliament passed what were called the Enclosure Acts. And that effectively meant that what had been common land became privatized, and the private landowners wanted to demarcate their land and their fields. And so these dry stone walls were built all over the Cotswolds. The other main period when they were built was in the 19th century, during periods of recession, when the landowners, who had huge estates, some of them, would hire local people who are otherwise out of work to build walls all around their estates. So if you go to some of the bigger estates, you will see these walls go on for ages. Now, a well-built dry stone wall, which was a great skill being a dry stone waller, would last over 100 years. When you drive through the Cotswolds nowadays, you'll see some in a bad state of repair or virtually collapsed. But the good news is that there is a movement to revive them, and some people are sort of doing courses to learn the art of making these stone walls, and gradually you are seeing projects in different areas of the Cotswolds where they're putting them back together again. But it's certainly a lovely sight to see, and as you can see, makes for a very good picture. If we can move on. Now, this is actually a picture of my passport. Now, why have I bothered to put that into this presentation? Well, if I open the inside front cover, you can see in the right-hand side there a row of cottages. And that row of cottages is a place called Bybury in the Cotswolds. And here's the real thing. Now, they were put into our passports in 2010. And the trouble is that it created a bit of celebrity, or in fact, a lot of celebrity for the poor little village of Bybury, because people worked out where it was and they were going there in droves, which is a shame because it was a fairly quiet, nice little village until then. Having said that, William Morris had already picked it out and said it was the most beautiful village in the Cotswolds. It certainly is, almost looks like a toy when you see it in real life, and they are occupied, these places. They were first was a wool shed, as it were, or a wool storage facility for a monastery from the 14th century. But in the 17th century, it was turned into these weavers' cottages. And the weavers used to wash the wool in the cottages, and then they would hang it out to dry on racks, which would be in a meadow, which you can see, well, you can't see it on the picture, but if you go there, you'll see there's a meadow in front of it, which is called Rack Isle, which is a sort of, is acknowledging what went on there in the past. Now it's owned by the National Trust, and the cottages are tenanted, but number 9 is rented out to people who want to experience living there. So if you want to do something very special and actually spend some time in a Cotswold village, it's very small, the property itself, you can get in touch with the National Trust and put your name down. So that's Bybury, a very pretty village and definitely worth putting on your list if you go there. Have the next slide, please, Nick. Now, you've probably got the impression that the Cotswolds has a lot going for it, and it certainly does. It's got a lot of famous residents, and it goes all the way to the top. In 1980, Prince Charles bought an estate there called Highgrove. There he is. Now, Prince Charles, as you probably know, is a very keen gardener. This property was built in the 18th century. It's a lovely Georgian mansion, and he set about developing the gardens of the property in particular and produced something quite spectacular. Now, this is open to the public, as you can see advertising there. This is from their own website. Garden tours, they're extremely popular. There's lots of different ways you could do it. The one I've been fortunate enough to participate in is a champagne tour, which is lovely. Now, you don't get to actually go into the house on these tours, but you get to see it. It's obviously in the gardens, and as you move around it, you find he's got different themes in different parts, and he's engaged some of the greatest gardeners in the world to see it. So going to Highgrove is a treat and a lovely thing to do in the Cotswolds. It just takes a little bit of forward planning. You can see here they also make a lot of their own products, which you can purchase online if you want to. Now, he actually moved quite close to his sister being, of course, Princess Anne, and her mum, our Queen, bought Princess Anne in 1976 an estate called Gatcombe Park, and that was for her marriage to her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips. He departed from the house when that marriage ended. The second husband is there with her now, Timothy Lawrence, but her daughter, Zara Phillips, lives on the estate, which is about 730 acres reportedly, and has a number of farmhouses on it, where she lives with her ex-England rugby playing husband and their 2 children. You can't really go there just to sort of look around, but they do have international equestrian events there. Princess Anne and Zara Phillips were both great riders, and Zara Phillips, Olympics gold medalist, in fact. But it doesn't stop there. You've got other glitterati who live in this area, not least the Beckhams, David and Victoria Beckham, or Posh Spice as she was known, and their family. They bought a £6 million farmhouse there, and have got a fabulous property in a place near Chipping Norton. And they form a part of what's called the Chipping Norton set, which is celebrities who live in and around that part of the Cotswolds. Another famous resident there is David Cameron, our former Prime Minister who gave us Brexit. When he lost that vote, he resigned from Parliament and he decided to write the inevitable memoir. And in order to do that, he bought a £25,000 shed to put into his garden, and there it is. I don't know whether his wife couldn't bear having him in the house or why he was consigned to the garden, but I'm sure it'll end up being a very lucrative pastime for him. But there's a certain village called Kingham where there's a good chance if you go into the pub for lunch, in will walk David Cameron. The other person I just want to mention is Damien Hirst. Damien Hirst is one of the most famous and commercially successful British artists. And he very famously in 1994 came up with one of his quite shocking pieces of art, which is in the Tate Modern in London, which is a sheep which is suspended in on formaldehyde in a sort of a large see-through case. And it's done in such a way that the sheep looks as though it's alive. Now, the connection with the Cotswolds, apart from the fact that he lives there, is that it was another one of these pre-Raphaelites who had done a piece on sheep, which was all about the idea of sheep straying from the flock, which was actually done by Holman Hunt, one of these pre-Raphaelites. And the idea was that he was depicting in that picture how people were moving away from the church and the security that the church gave them and the degradation, as he saw it, that came with that. So it had a strong political message or religious message which clearly impacted on Damien Hirst. So there is me. That is my charabanc. I can take 6 people in it. It takes about 1.5 hours to get to the Cotswolds from London. Of course, I go to lots of other places, either as day trips like Oxford and Bath, etc. as well. I also use it in London. It's for people who want to do private tours, and it gives us great flexibility. I would very much like to meet you in person in the future. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask.
Mitchell, thank you so much for that rapid run through the delights of the Cotswolds. It is, I know, it's a place really you do need to go with a driver guide, don't you? It's not a place you can do really on your own on public transport.
It's true, Nick. I mean, you can get into the area, but it's really getting from village to village, and that's what most people like to do. Go to maybe 2 or 3 villages, have tea in one, have a pub lunch in another, and just wander about. Some of them got some really lovely little arts and crafts shops and interesting nooks and crannies. But if you were to wait for a bus, you might miss the one bus a day that goes through that village. It's not really ideal for public transport, no.
Brilliant. We've had a few questions. First, just clarify the church you talked about with the association with Tolkien is in Stow-on-the-Wold.
Stow-on-the-Wold, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. There is a question from Bill, if I can just find it here. Have I lost it now? Bill is in Texas, and he wants to know why. There he is. Why do you think so many thrillers and mystery novels are set in the Cotswolds?
Well, thanks for that very nice question, Bill. I hope you're having a nice day. I don't know specifically thrillers and mystery novels. I think it's more to do with the fact that it's just a wonderful backdrop. I mean, the thing is, if you're trying to create an atmosphere and you want to sort of show something historic, you don't need to go and build any sets or anything. You just need to go to a Cotswold village. You may have heard of Midsummer Murders, but actually it was very unfortunate to live in that village. It seemed that people were getting murdered every other week. And a lot of these places have only got a population of a few hundred. So pretty bad odds. But that wasn't actually filmed here. But I mean, there has been a lot of filming here. But I don't know specifically why murders and mysteries and thrillers. I don't know about that.
So Pepe has a question. Pepe wants to know, what was your favourite village? What is your favourite village that you like taking people to?
You know what? You feel somewhat reluctant to say, give an answer, because if I like that example of Byberry, when it appeared in the passport, people found out the secret and the place was inundated. But being serious about it, it's a difficult balance for the Cotswolds because obviously tourism is now hugely important to them. But tourism has upsides and downsides, and I'm sure now they'd be desperate and very keen to get tourists to come back. But just before this COVID thing emerged, and there was concern in some villages, I'll certainly say that Burford, which I mentioned, is a lovely village. It can get a little bit busy because there's only one road going through it, but it's very pretty, and there's an incredible array of architecture just in that one village, and some really nice little shops, the inevitable church, as you saw, and that there's at least 5 pubs.
And of course, the Cotswolds is somewhere you can go and you can maintain the social distancing, which we are required to do at the moment. So you can put people in the back of your transport, you can take them, you can show them the wonderful views all around the Cotswolds.
Yeah, so I actually do lead some walks myself. I mean, most of the people that go with me don't want to do really hard walks. They just want to sort of get a little bit off the beaten track. And I've got a few circular ones, so we can park the car somewhere. I tell them how long it is. In one particular walk, actually, which goes by Broadway Tower, you get a nice tea stop about halfway round, and then it's downhill all the way back. So that's a really nice walk. But yeah, I mean, there are lakes there are little village walks, there are river walk, little woodland walks. You don't need to do too much research. You can find a good walk there, and it's really good for that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. A few more comments. There's Sophie saying she's reading the Agatha Rising books, which take place in the Cotswolds. We've also got people from watching all around the world. So we've got people in Russia, we've got people in the States, we've got people in South America. So one in Sevastopol here. We've got Catamarca in Argentina.
Lovely.
We've got people in the UK as well, Kent, Sussex. Oh, there's one from Minnesota. So thank you everyone for watching.
Hello, Diana.
If you want to know more about Mitchell, then you've got Mitchell's website. I'll just show you the address again. It's theenglandtourguide.com. That will take you to Mitchell's own website. If you want to know more about the rest of our guides, then the best place to go is the Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk. And that will tell you all about the types of tours we do. And if you search carefully, one of the tours that we do is a Cotswolds tour. So you can click on the information there, and that will tell you about the sort of things you could expect to do in a day in the Cotswolds. But the thing is your day, so it's up to you to arrange with the guide what you want to see. The guide can recommend places to go, places to have lunch. It'll be a wonderful day out. There's also virtual tours, of course, which is something that we've just recently launched. And that, if you go right to the top of our webpage, you'll see a place you can click on London Virtual Tour, and that takes you to a separate page which tells you all about the different types of virtual tours that we can do. Lots of walks around London, looking at the beautiful buildings, looking at the history. So much history in London. It's been here for 2,000 years, ever since the Romans founded the city on the north bank of the River Thames. So many things we can tell you about, which you can book on a virtual tour. We do have someone, if I can find the comment here, who's booked a few virtual tours with us and highly recommends it. So, you know, we're getting good feedback for the virtual tour. So if you're interested, do go and have a look on that information there. All you have to do to get in touch with one of the guides is go down to the bottom of the form, fill in all your details, tell us what you want to do, what you want to see, how many of you there are. That will go to 3 of our guides, and they will get back to you and they'll let you know the sort of things they can offer. And if they can't do what you're interested in, they'll find a guide who can. So it's very worth checking out that page, the London Virtual Tour, which is on the homepage of the Guide London website. Thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. Do join us on Friday. Friday, we're going to visit London Zoo, one of the great attractions of London, one of the best zoos in the world, one of the best research zoos as well. We'll be visiting that, and we'll hopefully be talking to someone from London Zoo about how the zoo coped with the lockdown and how the animals coped with the lockdown, suddenly not having any visitors from people. Did that make the animals feel about, make them worry? Did it stress them? You know, we'll be finding out exactly how they coped with that. But from all of us here, from Mitchell and from myself, we'll say for the moment, goodbye.
Goodbye.